It's a wild world out there, and nations are facing challenges that could bring them to their knees. From political chaos in Africa to economic crises in Europe, the threat of national collapse isn't just a dystopian movie plot, it's a real, looming issue. Governments are struggling to keep control, economies are teetering, and everyday people are facing challenges that could upend their lives. So what's going on? Why are these countries on the brink of collapse? Well, that's exactly what we're going to discover today. We're taking a hard look at 10 nations teetering on the edge, looking at everything from political upheavals to economic disasters and social unrest, so buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Number 10. Venezuela. Once the crown jewel of Latin America, Venezuela is now in the midst of one of the worst economic collapses the world has ever seen. Its story is a classic case of mismanagement, corruption, and the devastating consequences of over-reliance on a single commodity: oil. When oil prices were high, Venezuela thrived, but when they dropped, it all came crashing down. Inflation hit a jaw-dropping 200% in 2024, and the government's solution? Print more money. That only devalued the currency even further, making things even worse. The humanitarian impact has been staggering. Food, medicine, and basic goods are nearly impossible to come by, and those who can afford them are paying outrageous prices. 7 million people have fled the country, creating one of the largest refugee crises in recent history. The poverty rate has skyrocketed to 60%, and experts predict it will only rise as the country's economy continues to shrink. Nicolas Maduro's government is holding on to power through repression, but with the country in such disarray, it's only a matter of time before things come undone. If Venezuela doesn't find a way to diversify its economy and curb inflation, the country could face complete collapse in 2025. Number 9. Lebanon. Lebanon, once known for its vibrant culture and rich history, is now a shadow of its former self. The Lebanese pound has lost 98% of its value, and the people are suffering from one of the worst financial crises in the world. Prices for basic necessities have skyrocketed, and many families are struggling to get by on less than $1,000 a month, which is far below what's needed to survive. And just to make things even worse, Lebanon's banking system is in complete disarray. Citizens can't access their own savings, leaving millions in a state of despair. The country's sectarian political system has done little to fix the problem. Corruption runs deep, and political gridlock prevents any meaningful reforms. Protests are frequent, but the government seems incapable or unwilling to do anything about it. The healthcare system is near collapse, with hospitals facing severe shortages of supplies and personnel. Adding to the chaos, Lebanon is also home to the highest per capita number of refugees in the world, straining its already fragile infrastructure and social systems. Without significant international intervention, Lebanon may not make it through 2025. Number 8. Tunisia. Tunisia, the birthplace of the Arab Spring, is now facing an economic crisis that could threaten its very existence. The country's budget deficit is nearing 10%, and unemployment, particularly among young people, is soaring. Youth unemployment is above 37%, and with little economic opportunity, many are turning to protests and social unrest to express their frustration. Tunisia's GDP growth has been dismal, averaging just 1.2% from 2016 to 2021, far too slow to keep up with population growth or improve living standards. To make matters worse, Tunisia is heavily reliant on imports for essential goods like food and fuel. The war in Ukraine has disrupted global supply chains, driving up the prices of wheat, fuel, and fertilizers, which has led to severe shortages and price hikes for everyday items. The country's public debt is ballooning, and the government is negotiating with the IMF for a loan that would come with strict austerity measures, cuts to wages, subsidies, and public services. These reforms could spark further unrest in a country already on edge. Corruption also remains a huge problem, with Tunisia ranking poorly on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. Unless the government can implement serious reforms and stabilize the economy, Tunisia could be headed for a major collapse. Number 7. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's once thriving economy has been brought to its knees by a staggering debt crisis. With over $51 billion in external debt and a debt-to-GDP ratio exceeding 100%, the country is in financial ruin. Much of this debt is owed to international lenders like the IMF and World Bank, as well as to major powers like China and India, and it's unclear how Sri Lanka will ever pay it back. The devaluation of the Sri Lankan rupee by 30% has caused prices for basic goods to skyrocket, and inflation hit over 70% at its peak in 2022. While inflation has stabilized somewhat, the cost of living remains incredibly high, and many Sri Lankans are struggling to make ends meet. The political situation is equally grim. Widespread protests have erupted in response to the government's mishandling of the economy, and nearly 30% of the population now lives below the poverty line. The government's decision to ban chemical fertilizers in 2020, aimed at promoting organic farming, was a disaster, leading to a dramatic drop in agricultural productivity and food shortages. The government's inability to address these crises has left Sri Lanka on the brink of collapse, and without a clear plan to restructure its debt and stabilize the economy, 2025 could be a disastrous year for the country. Number 6, Pakistan. Pakistan's economy is teetering on the edge of collapse, and the situation is only getting worse. As of September 2023, Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves were so low they could only cover about 5 weeks of imports. That's terrifyingly low for a country that relies heavily on imports for food, fuel, and other essential goods. The Pakistani rupee is at an all-time low, and inflation is expected to hit 27% by 2024. With debt servicing consuming nearly 40% of government revenue, the country is drowning in debt, and the IMF bailout package offers only temporary relief. Political instability is another huge factor. With elections looming, the political landscape is more polarized than ever, and there's little confidence that any new government will be able to fix the country's problems. Poverty is widespread, with nearly 40% of the population living below the poverty line, and public services like healthcare and education are crumbling. The government is facing massive challenges in addressing the aftermath of natural disasters like floods, which have devastated agricultural productivity and displaced millions of people. Without major reforms and international aid, Pakistan's situation will likely worsen in 2025. Number 5, Kenya. Kenya's political landscape has been volatile for years, but the country is now facing challenges that could lead to its collapse. Ethnic tensions, corruption, and political instability have plagued the country for decades, and the aftermath of the 2022 elections has left many unresolved issues. Corruption is a massive problem, with Kenya ranking 126th out of 180 countries on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. This corruption has seeped into every level of government, affecting everything from infrastructure development to public services. Kenya's economy is struggling under the weight of rising public debt, which reached 73% of GDP by 2022. The country is also facing a severe food crisis, exacerbated by drought, inflation, and internal conflict. Crop failures and livestock deaths have left many Kenyans malnourished, and the government's Vision 2030 development plan seems like a distant dream. Terrorism is also a persistent threat, particularly from the Somalia-based Al-Shabaab group, which has carried out devastating attacks in recent years. Unless Kenya can address its political and economic challenges, the country could face even more instability in 2025. Number 4, Belarus. Belarus is a country trapped in a web of political, economic, and social challenges, and its future looks increasingly uncertain. The country's close ties to Russia during the Ukraine conflict have led to crippling economic sanctions from the European Union, cutting Belarus off from the global financial system and causing massive disruptions to trade and commerce. Banks have been cut off from foreign capital, and the country is facing severe shortages of essential goods, driving up the cost of living and fueling public discontent. The political situation is equally dire. President Alexander Lukashenko has held on to power through brutal repression, but widespread protests and dissatisfaction with his government continue to grow. Infrastructure is crumbling, and Belarus's involvement in the Ukraine conflict has made the country even more isolated. Public services are failing, and corruption is rampant, with Belarus ranking near the bottom of global corruption indices. If the situation doesn't improve soon, Belarus could face a complete economic and political collapse in 2025. Number 3, Ghana. Ghana, once one of Africa's most stable and prosperous countries, is now facing a severe economic crisis. The Ghanaian cedi has lost over 55% of its value against the US dollar, and inflation hit a staggering 30% in 2022. The country's debt, has spiraled out of control, with public debt now totaling $54 billion, or 78% of GDP. Debt servicing is consuming a huge portion of government revenue, leaving little for investment in infrastructure, healthcare, or education. Political tensions are also rising as the 2024 elections approach, and there are growing concerns that conflict could erupt if the situation continues to deteriorate. Corruption is rampant, with Ghana ranking 72nd on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, and recent protests have highlighted the public's frustration with the government's inability to address the crisis. Unless Ghana can find a way to stabilize its economy and address its growing debt burden, the country could face significant instability in 2025. Number 2, Nigeria. Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, is facing a multitude of crises that could lead to its collapse in 2025. Frequent power grid failures have left millions of Nigerians without electricity, and the country's unreliable infrastructure is stifling economic growth. Nearly 30% of government revenue is tied up in debt repayments, leaving little room for investment in critical sectors like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The country's oil wealth, once its greatest asset, has become a burden, with mismanagement, theft, and shifting global energy markets draining revenue. Nigeria's debt-to-GDP ratio is expected to hit nearly 47% by 2025, leaving the country dangerously close to financial collapse. Ethnic tensions and political instability have also exacerbated the situation, with corruption eroding public trust and creating a climate of unrest. If Nigeria doesn't address these issues soon, the country could face even more challenges in the coming year. Number 1, Ethiopia. Topping the list is Ethiopia, a country ravaged by civil war and economic collapse. The ongoing conflict has devastated the country's infrastructure, displaced millions of people, and caused widespread famine. As of late 2023, Ethiopia's external debt was nearly $18 billion, and the government is seeking debt relief through international frameworks like the G20's Common Framework. But debt is only one of the country's problems. Ethiopia is also vulnerable to climate change, with erratic rainfall and rising temperatures threatening the country's agriculture sector, which is the backbone of its economy. Frequent droughts and floods have worsened food insecurity, and tensions over the Nile River have escalated, with Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam becoming a point of conflict with Egypt and Sudan. Without a resolution to the conflict and serious reforms to address the country's economic challenges, Ethiopia could face a catastrophic collapse in 2025. 10 countries on the brink of collapse in 2025. From political turmoil to economic crises, these nations are facing challenges that could bring them to their knees. Will they survive? Only time will tell, but one thing is clear: the world is watching. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Which country do you think will collapse first? Let's keep the conversation going, and stay tuned for more deep dives into global issues. Thanks for watching.